Chapter 5, page 51, Catching the Bad Guys. The man Sonia met in the law library that night was Robert Morgenthau. He was the district attorney or DA for New York County. DAs are lawyers who work for the city and county. They bring charges against criminals, put them on trial, and try to send them to jail. DAs are also called prosecutors. Morgenthau was famous in New York. He was a tough prosecutor. The night Sonia met him, he was visiting Yale. He was trying to hire Yale Law School graduates to come for him in New York City. Sonia listened to what he had to say. He explained that in most big law firms, young lawyers had to wait years before they got a chance to go to court. But in his office, new lawyers prosecuted criminals their first year on the job. Sonia loved the idea of going to court and speaking to juries, just like Perry Mason. Morgenthau liked Sonia right away and soon offered her a job. Working in the DA's office didn't pay very much, not compared to the money she could make at a big law firm. Still, it paid a lot more than Sonia's mother had ever earned. And it was work that she felt she was cut out to do. In 1979, Sonia joined the New York City DA's office. She would be one of 300 assistant DAs. New York City was full of crime then. Thousands of people were arrested every day. The assistant DAs had to decide which crimes were important enough to prosecute. There was a lot to learn about being a DA, and none of it had been taught in law school. Sonia had to learn one on the job. She was given just a few weeks of training. She learned how the court system worked and how to bring charges against criminals. The new assistant DAs also had practice sessions. They were called mock trials. Sonia learned how to talk to a jury and convince them that she was right. Her first real case in court involved a young college student who had been in a street fight. Sonia described the case when she wrote about it in her book. She said that she stood in front of the judge that day. She stammered. She didn't feel ready. The judge was using words she didn't even understand. Sonia lost her first case, but she didn't let that stop her. She knew what to do, ask for help, and learn more. She won her second case. In fact, she did so well, her bosses considered her a star. Usually, the new DAs handled small crimes for a long time before they were given more important cases. But Sonia moved up very fast. The work was hard in New York DA's office, and the hours were long. Every week, Sonia had to spend one whole day talking to police officers about their arrests. Once a month, she had to stay in court all day and into the night till 2 a.m. Working such long hours, Sonia had to be careful about her diabetes. She had to make sure she ate properly so she wouldn't faint in court. Her office was tiny and unpleasant. She was usually too hot or too cold. At first, she didn't even have an office. Her desk was in a doorway. Still, most of the time, Sonia enjoyed the work. She liked winning cases, but she also knew when it was right to drop the charges. Her bosses had taught her how to be tough but fair. They trusted her judgment. In 1982, Sonia handled one of the biggest cases of her career as a DA. It was called the Tarzan murder case. The criminal was a man named Richard Maddox. He robbed apartments by swinging on a rope like Tarzan. He burst through the windows. If someone was home when he broke in, he shot them. Sonia was chosen to help out on the case. She had to interview the witnesses. Just like a detective, and just like Nancy Drew, she found a clue that helped prove Maddox was guilty. Her smart work helped put the Tarzan murderer in jail. But even though she liked being a DA, the job was taking a toll on her. She and Kevin hardly spent any time together. They didn't have as much in common now either. In 1983, Sonia and Kevin divorced. They weren't mad at each other. They had simply grown up and grown apart. Now Sonia had to start a new life on her own. Chapter 6, Moving Up and Moving On. After her divorce, Sonia got an apartment in Brooklyn near friends from work. During the week, she and her friends worked very hard. But on weekends, they had parties and went to concerts and the theater. Sonia rented a house at the beach. She knew her life might be short because of her diabetes. Sonia wanted to live fully and do as much as she could with the time she had. One way to live fully, Sonia decided, was to have new and different experiences. She decided to move on to another job. So, in 1984, she took a job at the law firm called Pavia and Harcourt. Sonia's job was exciting and glamorous. She was to help an Italian company called Fendi. Fendi made expensive handbags that were sold all over the world. But in 1980s, fake Fendi handbags started popping up in New York. Criminals sold these copies on the street for very low prices. Why would somebody pay $350 for a purse if, for only $45, they could buy one that looked almost the same? Every time someone bought a fake bag, Fendi lost money. Sonia went to court. She got a judge to agree that the criminals should be stopped. The court gave her permission to seize the fake bags. That meant she was legally allowed to go out on the streets and take all the fake bags away from the criminals. It was dangerous work. So Sonia didn't do it alone. A group of former police officers went with her. The problem was that the criminals were tough. Sometimes they fought back. Sometimes they grabbed their fake stuff and ran away. Sonia and the police had to chase after them. Over time, the bad guys began to recognize Sonia. They threatened to hurt her. Sonia had to wear a bulletproof vest. Some of the younger lawyers who worked with Sonia were afraid to go out on raids with her, but Sonia loved the raids. One time, she and the police seized 23,000 handbags. The Fendi family who owned the business invited her to Rome. They also took Sonia all over Europe. They showed her what life was like for people who were rich and famous. Still, Sonia remained true to her roots. She invited the Fendis to come to her mother's home for Thanksgiving dinner in the Bronx. She was never ashamed of her humble beginnings. She was proud of her family and her past. In 1988, the lawyers who owned Piva and Harcourt took a vote. They decided to make Sonia a partner in the law firm. Now, she was one of the bosses. She earned a big salary, had a great job, and traveled all over the world. What more could she want? In the back of her mind, Sonia had always wanted one more thing. She didn't tell anyone, but she secretly wanted to be a judge. Chapter 7, Your Honor. Sonia thought she was keeping it secret, her dream of being a judge. But somehow, the older, more experienced lawyers in her life seemed to know. They gave her advice that would help her achieve her goal. Jose Cabranes, her mentor, told her to do volunteer work for Puerto Rican groups that needed lawyers. David Botwinick, one of the 9 partners at Piva and Harcourt, helped Sonia get an important volunteer job at the state of New York. Then her old boss, Robert Morgenthau, stepped in. He asked the mayor of New York to put Sonia on a committee that looked at how money was spent in political campaigns. All of her volunteer jobs gave Sonia a chance to be noticed by politicians. And guess who appointed judges to the biggest, most important courts? Politicians. When the time was right, David Botwinick encouraged Sonia to apply to be a U.S. District Court judge. The U.S. District Court was not like the state courts where criminals were put on trial. It was not like the court where Sonia had been a prosecutor. It was a higher court in charge of the most important kinds of cases. The judges, not juries, made the decisions. Wow, Sonia thought. Being a judge on the district court? That would be incredible. But Sonia was only 36 years old. What were the chances she would be chosen? It took Sonia nearly a week to fill out the application. She had to explain everything about her life, every person she knew, every case she'd worked on, every volunteer job she'd held. The court system in America can be confusing. There are so many different kinds of courts. Local courts in towns and cities handle small problems. Traffic courts deal with people who get tickets for driving too fast. Family courts help settle problems when people get divorced. State courts help handle bigger crimes. Juries decide whether the person is guilty or not. Federal courts deal with laws that apply to the whole country. If someone makes counterfeit money, that's a federal crime. It is illegal in every state. There are 3 layers in the federal court system. The lowest federal court in the U.S. District Court. There are 94 district courts across the country. The district court in New York is one of the most important because so many big cases start in New York City. The next highest federal court is called the Circuit Court. This is where lawyers go to appeal rulings. That means they try to change the verdict of the lower court. Cases are decided by a group of judges, usually 3. The highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. It is the last chance to reverse a lower court's ruling. There are 9 justices, another name for judges, on the Supreme Court. They are appointed for life. When one of them dies or retires, the president suggests to the Congress who should fill the job, but Congress has to approve the president's recommendation. Sonia sent the job application to Senator Patrick Moynihan. Sonia sent the job application to Senator Patrick Moynihan. He was a New York senator who would recommend her, but that was only the beginning. She would have to be interviewed by a lot of people. She would have to answer questions in front of Congress. Then Congress would have to vote. If they didn't approve her, Sonia wouldn't become a judge. Do you think all these steps happened quickly? No, the process took almost 2 years. Finally, in 1992, Congress approved her. President George W. Bush named her as a federal judge. Her court would be the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, which covered 8 counties in lower New York. It was an incredible honor and a dream come true. Best of all, she could stay in this job forever. Federal judges were appointed for life. Learning to be a judge was just like everything else Sonia had done. She had to dive in and learn fast on the job. Years later, Sonia admitted at first she was scared to sit in the courtroom. She tried to handle all her cases in her office, but is called the judge's chambers. But finally, she had to go into court and sit on the bench. She put on her judge's black robe. She was so nervous, her knees knocked together. Pretty soon, Sonia felt confident being a judge. In 1995, she had to decide one of the biggest cases of the year. The case was about baseball. All Major League Baseball players had gone out on strike. They didn't like the deal that the team owners were offering them. The strike had been going on for 7 months. There had been no World Series the year before. Sonia was the judge for the case. The day of the trial, TV cameras and reporters filled the halls outside the courtroom. Sonia listened to the lawyers for each side. Then she took a short break. Some people thought Judge Sotomayor would take days or weeks to decide the case, but Sonia loved baseball just as much as everybody else. She was a big fan of the New York Yankees. She didn't want the strike to drag on. Spring training was just around the corner. So she gave her decision right away. She was kind and polite to everyone, but she agreed with the players. The owners were being unfair. She said the owners should keep working with the players for a new contract. When the players heard her ruling, they ended the strike. Sonia Sotomayor had saved baseball. The New York Times wrote about Sonia. They said she was like a great baseball player who could wake up on Christmas Day and pull a curveball. That meant she didn't need any spring training or practice to do her job well. Sonia probably didn't agree with that, though. Hard work and practice had always been the keys to her success in everything she did. Chapter 8. Life was good for Judge Sotomayor. She loved her work and her friends. The people who worked for her were like a second family. Sometimes she invited them home with her to have burgers and play cards. Her diabetes was under control now, too. She was very careful about what she ate. She always took her insulin and when she needed it. She sometimes gave herself shots at meals right in front of people. Sonia's life could have gone out like that forever. But on June 25th, 1997, she got a call from President Bill Clinton. He wanted to appoint her to a high court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Sonia knew what that meant. It meant she would have to go through a lot of interviews again. She would have to answer questions in front of Congress again. Then Congress would have to vote to approve her. The whole thing could take a long time, but it was a huge honor. It was also a signal that someday a president might choose her for the Supreme Court. As before, Senator Moynihan stood up for Sonia in Congress. So did the other senator from New York, Alphonse D'Amato. 10,000 people wrote letters to support her. Still, Congress stalled. For a long time, they wouldn't vote. Why not? Was it because congressmen didn't want a Hispanic woman to have a chance at being on the Supreme Court someday? The stalling trick was used a lot, especially when appointing people of color. Other nominees became judges quite quickly, but minorities and women often had to wait 2 or 3 years. Finally, though, in October 1998, the Senate voted in favor of Sonia. On November 6th, there was a swearing-in ceremony. Many famous people were there, so were Sonia's family and friends. The 12 other judges from the Second Circuit Court were there too, including Jose Cabranes. He was now an important judge himself, and he swore her in. In court, she would be sitting right alongside him. After the ceremony, Sonia and her family celebrated. And that night, there was another special event. Sonia's mother, Selena, was getting married. She was in love with a man named Omar Lopez. Sonia was a judge, performed their marriage ceremony. Sonia had a wonderful job, close family, and dear friends. There was nothing more she could ask for or expect. Or was there? Chapter 9. One of Nine. For the next 10 years, Sonia not only served as a judge, she also taught classes at 6 different law schools. She gave speeches all over the country. Then, one day in 2009, she got a call from the White House. One of the 9 Supreme Court justices was going to retire. President Barack Obama would have to pick a replacement. Do not tell anyone, the White House told Sonia. Sonia was on the short list of people President Obama was considering. There were 3 other people on the list. Sonia knew what that meant. If she was nominated, there would be more interviews, more questions from Congress, more waiting. Finally, the Senate would have to vote. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is one of 3 branches of the U.S. government. It is a judiciary, oh my goodness.